China just struck hard. A 125% tariff on U.S. exports. It hit like a thunderclap. But that's not the real story. That was just the opening shot. The real story is unfolding beneath the surface, quiet and deliberate. A series of moves so calculated that by the time Washington fully understands what's happening, it may already be too late. This isn't retaliation. It's a controlled detachment, a decoupling, and it's moving faster than anyone in the West dares to admit. It began on April 10, 2025. China blindsided U.S. exporters with a crushing tariff targeting American autos, tech machinery, and semiconductor parts, industries that funneled more than $36 billion into the U.S. economy just last year. The blow landed just 72 hours after President Trump authorized $88 billion in tariffs against Chinese EVs and rare earths. The symmetry was precise, surgical. Bloomberg called it a precision strike. But Beijing wasn't just retaliating, it was making a statement. Wang Yong, senior advisor at Peking University, didn't mince words. We're targeting leverage, industries tied to U.S. electoral politics. This isn't defensive anymore, it's tactical. And the markets reacted with panic. Tesla froze shipments to China. Deere & Co. lost over $2 billion in market value in 2 days. Soy futures slumped 4.3%, spooked by fears of broader fallout. But even that chaos was only the noise. The real shift? It's structural, quiet, permanent. While headlines screamed about tariffs, Beijing was already moving the chessboard. Behind closed doors, China was pulling away from the dollar. Its U.S. Treasury holdings plunged to $668 billion, a 15-year low. But that was just the beginning. China's state banks, Construction Bank ICBC, have stopped issuing new dollar-denominated loans for state-backed projects. They're pivoting to renminbi and euro-backed financing. A subtle shift, confirmed by Reuters, but the implications are massive. Beijing isn't just hedging. It's insulating, dismantling its exposure to the dollar system. On purpose. Quietly. Relentlessly. Goldman Sachs' Maggie Wei put it bluntly. This is a soft retreat. A decoupling engineered to preempt U.S. financial weapons before they're ever deployed. And if China isn't waiting for the next round of sanctions, what exactly is it preparing for? The answer came a day later, cloaked in legalese. On April 11th, China's Ministry of Commerce labeled certain U.S. imports as no longer commercially viable. The phrase sounded dry, bureaucratic. But the meaning was sharp-edged. American goods weren't banned, they were deemed inefficient. A strategic framing, not political, economic. It's a move that shields Beijing from WTO backlash while quietly pushing domestic firms to abandon U.S. contracts. And they are. BYD walked away from a $500 million sensor supply deal with an American firm, just days after the announcement. Trade law expert Henry Gao called it what it is. A regulatory green light for disengagement, dressed up as market logic. And what happens when that logic becomes policy? When market-based decoupling isn't the exception, but the new rule? Some of America's closest allies are already hedging. In March, Germany's BASF signed a $7.2 billion expansion deal in Guangdong, its largest foreign investment outside Europe, despite U.S. pressure to curb China ties. Saudi Arabia went a step further, completing a landmark crude oil sale to China's Sinopec, without using the dollar at all. Instead, they settled the deal using China's digital Yuan. The Financial Times reports France is lobbying for BRICS EU engagement. Brazil is pushing to make China's payment system interoperable with Latin America's. These aren't isolated events. They're quiet realignments. Citibank strategist David Lubin warned, a multipolar trading order is emerging, and the U.S. is no longer the default anchor. If even allies stop seeing U.S. trade policy as their own, how long before America is the one left outside the circle? Washington's once formidable sanctions arsenal is wearing thin. As of April 2025, over 640 Chinese entities have been sanctioned. And yet Chinese trade remains resilient. Exports to ASEAN surged 7.4% year-over-year in Q1. The dollar's grip on global finance is slipping. In 2020, the yuan made up just 2.2% of global SWIFT payments. Today it's over 6.3%. Even the semiconductor chokehold is beginning to crumble. Huawei just unveiled a 7nm chip built using a mix of Chinese lithography tools and Dutch machinery stockpiled before the bans. Tech analysts are stunned, but they shouldn't be. The very sanctions meant to cripple China's tech ambitions have lit a fire under them instead. Former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer finally admitted the truth. We underestimated their capacity to work around us. If sanctions are backfiring, what's left? Wall Street isn't waiting for Washington to answer. On April 10th, the Dow Jones crashed 1,000 points, erasing over $500 billion in value in a single day. The hit came after China's tariffs slammed U.S. agriculture, industrial machinery, and EV parts. Archer Daniels Midland dropped 11% in just 2 days. Deere and Company warned that $3.2 billion worth of inventory headed to China might now be dead weight. Goldman Sachs slashed its Q2 US GDP forecast from 2.3% to 1.5%, citing direct exposure to tariffs and a growing drag from collapsing exports. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers summed it up on Bloomberg. Markets are telling us something the administration hasn't fully processed yet. This isn't just a trade fight anymore. It's an economic firebreak, and it's already burning. So what happens when the world's largest economy no longer sets the tempo? When the rules that built the post-WTO order, the rules written in Washington, enforced in dollars, and trusted across oceans, start to crack. Not because of one cataclysm, but from 1,000 quiet shifts. The unraveling begins not with explosions, but with silence. China isn't rushing toward confrontation. It's moving with surgical patience. This is a nation thinking in dynasties, not quarters. While Washington lurches from election to election, Beijing is thinking in 25-year arcs, engineering systemic insulation, economic, technological, and ideological. And the numbers aren't lying. A 34% year-over-year increase in chip production isn't a headline. It's a brick in the wall. Slashing U.S. soybean imports by 70% in 6 years? That's not just trade rebalancing. It's strategic decoupling. Beijing isn't just cutting back, it's building away. Every new grain deal with Kazakhstan, every food stockpile, every shift in their sovereign wealth portfolio, it all speaks to a single, focused intent: resilience. The kind that doesn't blink when pressure's applied. And across the Pacific, the U.S. is sprinting in circles. Inflation's climbing, households are squeezed, and campaign rhetoric doubles down on economic nationalism without a coherent blueprint. Trump's camp calls for escalation. More tariffs, more friction, more bluster. But the markets are already reacting like the future's slipping out from under them. Forward contracts in agriculture? Vanishing. Supply chains in tech? Rerouted. Retail giants like Walmart? Already warning, input costs are surging and prices are following. But it's not just about prices. It's about permanence. Because this time the changes aren't cyclical. They're foundational. And they're happening on multiple fronts. Financially, China is peeling away from the dollar system one layer at a time. You don't diversify away from U.S. treasuries because you want better returns. You do it because you're preparing for a world where dollar dependence becomes a vulnerability, not a strength. The digital yuan isn't just a novelty, it's a prototype for a parallel system. On April 5th, when China cleared a $2.9 billion oil deal outside the U.S. dollar, it wasn't just flexing. It was testing. And the test passed. Now imagine that process scaled. Not in isolation, but in tandem with BRICS, with Africa, with Latin America. Imagine oil, grain, lithium, and semiconductors flowing across borders with zero U.S. dollar exposure. Imagine the Fed losing its seat at the table, not from weakness, but from irrelevance. Technologically, this divergence is accelerating even faster. U.S. sanctions were supposed to cripple Chinese tech. Instead, they lit a fire. Firms like Huawei are no longer just surviving, they're innovating. Xiaomi isn't waiting for a green light to export. It's already building in Mexico. TikTok is now a lightning rod not just for youth culture, but for geopolitical posturing. And AI? While the US debates regulation, China is building architecture. Militarily, the shift is quieter, but just as deliberate. The People's Liberation Army doesn't need to match the US ship for ship. It only needs to make US intervention costlier than it's worth. The South China Sea is already militarized. Taiwan, once a red line, is now a chess piece. And Beijing is playing the long game. Socially, the divergence is showing cracks in the democratic West. In America, polarization is at historic highs. Every election feels like an existential battle. Every economic hiccup gets politicized, every policy proposal drowned in tribal noise. And amid that chaos, strategic vision fades. Attention fragments. Gridlock wins. Meanwhile, China's control structure, though rigid, delivers consistency. It enforces a single narrative. It turns sacrifice into nationalism. And while that model has its own breaking points, it thrives in transition. Especially in times like this, when the global system is shifting, and strength lies in cohesion, not consensus. Globally, we're watching a realignment that feels more Cold War 2.0 than Globalization 2.0. Trade is sorting itself not by market logic, but by geopolitical trust. Friendly supply chains, ally shoring, tech bans, visa controls. The future isn't flat, it's fragmented. So when Morgan Stanley says, we may be past the point where the two economies can fully reintegrate, that's not a warning. It's an obituary. And what comes next? That's the trillion-dollar question. Because the US still holds immense power. The dollar is still dominant. The military unmatched. Innovation unmatched. But power assumes stability. And right now, America's internal contradictions are becoming external liabilities. If domestic politics remain this fractured, if economic strategy remains this reactive, then long-term credibility erodes. Slowly, but surely. Meanwhile, China keeps threading its new system together, quietly building the alternative. It's not trying to win the old game. It's replacing the board entirely. So we'll leave you with this. What if the next great global order isn't built by conquest or collapse, but by quiet substitution? A world where the US is still playing checkers while the rest are building a new kind of board? And if the new rules are being written in Mandarin, with code not treaties, with digital ledgers not dollars, does America even get to play? Let us know in the comments. And remember, this isn't future casting. This is already happening.